Okay. See if that looks good. Very good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Nice. Welcome to all of you for our ongoing satsang, and welcome to the many students who will be watching this satsang online, either live or after the fact. Before we begin, I want to apologize once again. There are more questions here. They're wonderful questions, but I think we're not going to be able to answer them all. We'll do the best we can. And as we've done before, we'll alternate between online questions and questions from our local students, and we'll see how it goes. So our first question is from Arun, who lives in Bangalore. Arun asks, please comment on the practice of Atma vichara, self-inquiry. Does an individual have to be an uttama adhikari to undertake the practice of Atma vichara? Uttama adhikari means a student of the highest order, a student who is this far away from becoming enlightened, and I've yet to meet any such people. I'm certainly not one of those people. So the teachings of Vedanta are meant for all of us. And there's so much teaching in the tradition of Advaita Vedanta that's meant to help us gain whatever preparedness we need to be able to reach enlightenment. So it's already built into the teachings of Vedanta. With regard, so do you have to be an especially good student or have some unique intellectual abilities? No, absolutely not. And any deficiencies will absolutely be addressed by the teachings of Vedanta themselves. The other question, the more fundamental question is what is Atma vichara? Vedanta is Atma vichara. Atma vichara means self-inquiry. The whole tradition of Advaita Vedanta is nothing, I shouldn't say nothing more because it sounds dismissive. The teachings of Advaita Vedanta is a method of guide, a method that you can use to guide your process of self-inquiry. That's it. We could even define Vedanta in those terms. Vedanta is a process of self-inquiry, Atma vichara, guided by the teachings of Vedanta. So Vedanta is the method which you use to guide this inner inquiry, this inner search. And that inner search, of course, has to do with discerning how it is that you're not your body, you're not your mind, how it is that you're not affected by whatever happens to your body and mind, eventually leading you to appreciate your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. So Atma vichara is primary to Advaita Vedanta, which means a lot of other things are not primary. For example, the doctrine of karma is not primary to the teachings of Vedanta. Discussions about what philosophers call cosmology, the cycles of creation, and how did all the elements get produced. None of that is primary to the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. What is primary is, as Arun said, Atma vichara, self-inquiry. Next question from Shobha, who lives in Oregon. She says, as I get further in my spiritual practice, I'm trying to live each moment by staying more connected to God. However, at the same time, I have to fulfill many daily duties to my family and home. My mind immediately gets caught up in worldly cares, and I lose my connection to God. How can I fulfill my duty in life while at the same time staying grounded in God? How can I face the world with inner peace? Can you please give me some practical steps? We can give a one-word answer. Yeah, karma yoga. By the way, karma yoga is one word. The two words combine into a compound. Karma yoga. Karma yoga is an elaborate set of teachings that enable you to do exactly what Shobha is trying to do. And that is to continually be connected to God, as she says, throughout the day while you're engaged in fulfilling your daily responsibilities. It's not hard to do, but you have to learn how to do it, like anything else. Computers are not hard to use, but you have to learn how to use a computer. In the same way, karma yoga, meaning to live a prayerful life all the time, no matter what you're engaged in, if you're at the office, if you're doing things at home, in any situation, to remain prayerfully connected to Ishvara. That is the goal of karma yoga. It's not hard to learn. We need some guidance. You can study the Bhagavad Gita. That's the primary source of guidance for learning how to practice karma yoga. The shortcut, though, on my website is a recent video called The Secret of Karma Yoga. It'll take you a long time to study the whole Bhagavad Gita. You can watch that video in 20 minutes. And you'll find most of the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita on karma yoga are summarized in that video. You may find it very helpful. The Secret of Karma Yoga. Then one more question here. This is from Damien, who lives in Canada. Are there various degrees of ahimsa, or is there only ahimsa? Ahimsa means non-injury, and the question is how to understand non-injury. And he gives a number of examples. Suppose there are ants or rodents coming into your home to eat or contaminate your food. Is it okay to kill them? Well, we've had this discussion actually on a number of occasions. And that is, if you allow ants and rodents to contaminate your food and make you and your family sick, isn't that causing harm to you and your family? So we would, here's the technical, so the general meaning the general point is, ahimsa does not mean the absolute, total, complete renunciation of causing any kind of harm whatsoever, because it's simply not possible. Whatever, you're walking down the road, you may step on an ant without seeing it. When you're eating food, you won't want to hear this, but there are microbes in food you're eating, and they get digested, and they get killed. So there's no way, and even when you eat, obviously eating animals is causing harm, but eating plants kills the plants. So there is no such thing as a life in which we cause zero harm. So you may have heard me say before that the of ahimsa, actually, in fact, that was in a recent video, I think, on that, there's a recent video on vegetarianism. Can you get enlightened without being vegetarian or something was the title of the video. And I get into the details, and there's an important detail here. The detail is this. The of ahimsa, actually in Sanskrit grammar, 5 different meanings for that And I don't want to give you a grammar lesson and explain each of the 5, but the meaning here is not none or no. The meaning here is little. Like if somebody asks you, can you give me some money? I'm broke, can you lend me some money? And you say, I'm sorry, I don't have anything to give you. Does that mean you have no money? or does it mean you don't have enough to give? So that's an English example of using this in the sense of little. So the best translation of ahimsa, first of all, the worst translation is non-violence. In my opinion, that's the worst translation because it suggests if I hurt you but not violently, it must be okay. Silly, right? So the best translation, I feel, of ahimsa is least harm. What a difference, non-violence versus least harm. And both are literally correct. You can say ahimsa means non-violence, fine, but in the context of living a life of dharma, non-violence has in fact in that video I think I point out that the translation of non-violence comes from India's fight for independence from the British, where Gandhiji, Mahatma Gandhi, adopted a certain means of non-violent resistance. Non-cooperation is one of the terms he used, but it was specifically a non-violent kind of resistance, and I think that got associated very much with the word ahimsa. So as a political strategy, ahimsa can mean non-violence, but as a mode of living, ahimsa means least harm. Okay, enough said. Shall we take some questions here in the room? Any of you have a question? Yeah. Is this on? Good. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Namaste. So in Gita, Sri Krishna mentions Mama Ivansho Jiva Loke, Jiva Buddha Sanatana, right? So all the jivas are my eternal fragments or parts. Mm-hmm. And also, Shvetashvatara Upanishad defines the size of jiva, kind of, right? This, if you split the hair in 100 parts and even in 100 parts. So prior that, it mentions the size of the thumb. So
Angushta matra purusha. Yeah. Yes. So, Atma is the size of the thumb. Did you know that? Not bigger, not smaller.
Yeah, and right after that it goes that it's like if you split the hair, like it defines as the infinitesimal. How this eternal, like unchanging being, or after that, I think he like these Ishvaras, saying from the Ishvara's perspective, like how is he dividing itself into like eternal fragments, or how the jivas are fragments, and what is the size given in the Upanishads? Okay. Why is this size?
First of all, I'm really glad you said, how does Ishvara divide himself? He didn't say, how does Brahman divide itself? Excellent. Because Brahman does not become dual. Brahman is a non-dual reality that is unchanging, that underlies this world of duality in which we live. Ishvara, correctly said, is the one who gives rise to this universe. And metaphorically, we can say everything that exists is a manifestation of Ishvara or a little bit of Ishvara. How much of a bit is the question. And here we have a problem with metaphors. And to say Atma is like the size of the thumb dwelling, actually Purusha is a term that comes, is like the size of, actually that's Narayana Upanishad, I think that comes in, which is separate from what you've just quoted. These kinds of expressions, or if you cut up hair into finer and finer parts, these are metaphors. And every metaphor has a symbolic meaning. And we can't, the very idea, you don't go for the literal meaning, you go for the symbolic meaning. And the symbolic meaning is understood by looking at the entire body of scriptures, not by looking at one verse, and also by using a little bit of reasoning. So we say Shruti Yukti Anubhava, scripture plus reasoning, plus experience. So when we apply a little bit of reasoning to this, if Ishvara is the macrocosm, and we are all belonging to the microcosm, how big a part of Ishvara becomes manifest as the jiva. The problem with that line of thought is bigness. If it's in terms of physical size, we're in trouble because Atma has no physical dimensions. Like space. Space has no height, width, depth. And by the way, don't say, oh, but Swamiji, I can't understand this. There are so many things that don't have dimension. Or time. Take an idea like justice. How much does it weigh? And yet, do you understand what justice is? You understand the concept perfectly well. Well, justice has no weight, has no dimensions, has no location. It is a transcendent reality, and you have no problem understanding what justice is. So, what is the problem if we say Atma has no dimensions, no weight, no size, no location? And you can understand, it's not that hard. If you can understand justice as being dimensionless, you can understand Atma as being dimensionless. So dimensionless Atma cannot be a part. And the metaphor, I think, which is most often given, and probably you were quoting some actual scriptures, this metaphor is actually from Shankaracharya and later teachers, who take these scriptures with all of their metaphors and sometimes quite hard to understand. And Shankara wants to make it very easy for us to understand. And he says the relationship between macrocosm and microcosm, the relationship between Ishvara and Atma is like the relationship between the space in this room and the space in this pot. That's a very helpful metaphor. Again, it's just a metaphor. So the point is that the space in this pot is definitely you experience the space in the pot, and yet pot space is non-separate from and identical to the big space. So here, I think what we're up against is the difficulty in interpreting 2,500-year-old metaphors, which are pretty tricky. Do you want to follow up on that?
Yes. The process itself, how this unified being or consciousness is able to perceive, like, from many different viewpoints or many different jivas. So there is one philosopher, like Bernardo Kastrup, like analytical idealism. So he has very nice metaphor. He compares this like there is in psychology, there is a multiple disorder, multiple personality disorder.
Multiple personality disorder.
So he gives this kind of metaphor that this one mind can have this kind of process in it, that division happens like separation, like in psychology. And from my personal experience, like in childhood, everyone is able to do it somehow. Like we can play with ourselves in many roles. So can this process be somehow correlated to this like psychological phenomenon?
Sure. I'm not, if I understand your question or comment correctly, Ishvara is simultaneously present. Ishvara as pure consciousness. Let's put it like this, like that. Ishvara as pure consciousness is simultaneously present in any number of living beings, giving sentiency to those beings. And those beings each have a sense of being individual. They are a feeling of individuality. And that feeling of individuality comes not from consciousness. That feeling of individuality comes from our minds. You know, in our minds, we identify ourselves with the body and mind, and we identify ourselves with our personal histories, and we develop this sense of identity, individuality, all based on ego, that sense of being an individual. So it's not that Ishvara gives you your sense of individuality and you your sense of individuality. It doesn't work like that. Ishvara gives us all the same consciousness. We come along and we can give ourselves all of we can give ourselves these individual personalities. In fact, you mentioned multiple personality disorder, which is a serious psychological illness. So we could I wonder if a Vedantin could analyze that and say there are multiple jivas in one physical body. Perhaps that might be a legitimate interpretation, but the point is that someone with multiple personalities didn't receive them from Ishvara in a sense of the one consciousness in all. So that one consciousness in all is like the one space that could be manifest in many, many parts. So the individuality, the multiplicity is not due to space. The multiplicity is due to the parts. We call them upadhis. We've had this discussion before. In the same way, if there is an individual being or even a person with this multiple personality disorder, the multiplicity of individuals is not due to consciousness, but due to the individual minds and identification. Good. Another question here, please.
Namaste, Swamiji. What you were just referring to in terms of upadhis and how we kind of condition ourselves, is there a difference? I mean, there must be, because there's different words for it, between an upadhi and adhyasa, like the superimposition due to ignorance. Are they kind of one and the same, or?
Okay, that's a good question. These are technical terms that we use frequently, and they're not easily understood, technical terms, especially upadhi. So let's take adhyasa first. Adhyasa literally means superimposition, and it means when you superimpose something upon another. When you see the rope snake, when you're going down the dark alley and there's a rope coiled up in the darkness and you superimpose the snake on the rope. There's no snake, but you create that snake on the rope. If there's no, by the way, if there's no rope, can you create the snake? No. So you superimpose the snake on the rope. So that's our meaning of the word adhyasa, also adhyaropa. These are technical terms. They have exactly that meaning of superimposition. Upadhi is a completely different term and used in a different context. I'm sighing because to try to apply the word upadhi, we'll do it. You're not gonna, I'm not. So how does upadhi figure into this rope snake thing? First of all, let's get upadhi in a simpler sense. And upadhi often translated in a very unhelpful way as conditioning adjunct. What is I mean, it's not a bad translation, it's just not very helpful because it's a complex concept. Conditioning adjunct would be like this pot. A conditioning adjunct in the sense that the presence of the pot makes space seem limited or conditioned. Space appears to be conditioned by the pot. So conditioning adjunct is the best you can do in English, but the concept is a little bit more sophisticated. A conditioning adjunct is that which gives rise to an apparent conditioning, vast space appearing to be conditioned in the form of this pot. Now, how does that sense of upadhi apply to the rope snake metaphor? And I hesitate to give this example because it's quite heavy. That which gives rise to a mistaken impression is one way of understanding an upadhi. In the case of the rope snake, what is it that gives rise to the mistake? So in this case, what gives rise to the mistake, that space is small. What gives rise to that mistaken notion is pot. What gives rise to the idea that it's a snake?
The darkness.
Got it. The darkness, which is a metaphor for ignorance. The presence, got it. The presence of darkness is an upadhi, conditioning adjunct. Adjunct means it's not the thing. Notice the pot is not space. So it's an adjunct. But it's an adjunct that causes an apparent conditioning. In the same way, darkness is not the rope, but the presence of darkness, which is an adjunct, leads to a kind of conditioning. A kind of conditioning in which it doesn't look like a rope, it looks like a snake. And you correctly identified it as being ignorance. So ignorance is an upadhi. But these are, I'm not sure, does that work for you? Answered your questions? Okay. Okay. Let's take a couple more online questions and then we'll come back here. That one, this is a question from Amit, who lives someplace in India. It says, we often hear the phrase, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. Brahman is real, the world is not. While Brahman is the absolute reality, I understand this, but the term Jagat Mithya is confusing. Not just for Amit, for everyone. Is it that the world, Jagat, or universe is temporary, lasting only a few million years, and hence Mithya? In either case, when we face daily challenges to be financial, health, personal relationship, doesn't seem like it's mithya. So I think the issue here with them, another technical word. And just as sorry, I'm blanking out. Just as upadhi is a very technical word and has a subtle meaning, mithya is exactly the same. It's subtle, and it has to be understood properly. And it gets often mistranslated as illusion, or something which is like a dream, or something that is false, or something that is unreal. All of those meanings are wrong, absolutely wrong. And our classic example, you can see why I have this pot right here. It's used to illustrate so many principles in Advaita Vedanta. And here the principle, different than the space we were talking about before, but rather here we're talking about the relationship between clay and pot. Clay is the reality because of which this object exists. Just like Brahman is a reality because of which the universe exists. Because of clay, this name and form called pot can exist. Because of Brahman, the names and form that constitute Jagat, the world, can exist. So now we got Jagat, what about Mithya? If this pot is crushed, clay remains. If the universe undergoes dissolution, Brahman remains. There you have it. So mithya means I don't know, I've yet to find, in fact, my guru made a joke about this. He says, mithya is untranslatable with any English word. His joke was the best you can do is to use an American accent and say, mithya. He actually used that accent, and to see this very traditional guru with a big gray beard saying mithya. quite humorous to see him, to have seen him do that. So, in commentaries, the technical language to define mithya is adhisthana ananyatvam, that which is non-separate from its underlying reality. Now, that's not, that already is a mouthful and hard to understand, so let me put it in really simple terms. We define real as that which doesn't come and go. Anything that comes and goes is less real. Your dreams come and go, therefore it's less real than this waking world. But this waking world comes and goes, so it's less real than Brahman. Notice we have degrees of less real. So in this way, we would say that the pot comes and goes more than the clay does. So pot is less real than the clay. So to turn it around, we say that the clay is most real. The pot is less real, and this pot is even less real. Notice we have degrees of unreality. Vedanta is famous for this degrees of unreality. So mithya, when we say jagat mithya, it makes 2 points. One is that the existence of jagat depends on Brahman, the underlying reality, and secondly, that the appearance of jagat, the world that appears, is less real than its underlying reality. Notice this object is not illusion. This one is. So these are two different kinds of unreality. So in the same way, this pot is not an illusion. In the same way, we can't say that the world is an illusion. Jagan mithya does not mean that the world is an illusion. It means these two things. The world exists depending on Brahman, and that the world is less real than Brahman. That's what Jagan mithya means. Next, from Vaidya Balakrishnan, who lives here in New Jersey. Vaidya asked, as I understand it, thoughts arise in our minds due to sense perception, or due to past memories, or due to, we'll just leave it at past memories. And she defines as vasana or samskara. It's quite an elaborate Vedantic teaching on this. She says, this nearly explains the source of all thoughts except for the I thought, the ahankara or aham vritti. So she says, does the aham vritti, how is it that we wake up? This is a very interesting point she asks. When you wake up, do you have to remember who you are? It's kind of automatically. In fact, when you wake up, do you feel, what is this? Oh, it's me. That connection is instantaneous. It's automatic, right? So that, technically, that's ego, ahankara. Your identification with your body is part of one aspect of ahankara, and it is present upon awakening. How odd it would be, just for fun. Imagine if you woke up without that identification. You'd be staring up at the ceiling, saying, what in the world is going on? Because you wouldn't be identified with your body, you wouldn't be identified with your so-called inner autobiography, your whole life history and all the things that you have to do in the day, so there'd be no identification at all. Thank goodness that doesn't happen. It would be really strange to wake up and say, oh my God, who am I? Where am I? Fortunately, when you wake up, ahankara is already present, leading you to identify with your body and mind and your life. that when you get out of bed, you know what you're supposed to do in the day. The source of the aham, vritti, ahankara, the I thought, is no different than the source of other thoughts. It all comes from the same mind. She talks about vasana or samskara. Definitely there's aham vasana or aham samskara. That I thought is deeply embedded in your thinking. It's habitual, which is why when you wake up, you feel like an individual. Notice in deep sleep, it's gone. In deep sleep, you don't feel like an individual. When you wake up, it comes back because it is so deeply wired into your mind. We can call it a vasana, but making these technical distinctions doesn't really help. It just is a natural feature of the mind. Just as when you see me, a natural feature of your mind is to create an image of me in your mind through the process of perception. When you remember your mother or father, it's a natural feature of your mind to recall your mother or father and maybe create some kind of image in your mind. These are natural faculties of our minds. And ahankara is another natural faculty of the mind. Okay, one more here. And this is from Aparna. I don't know where Aparna lives. Someplace in Texas. Okay. And she has a number of questions. We'll just take one. And this actually connects to another question I hope we'll get to later as well. If you say, I want to gain enlightenment, I want to gain moksha, I want to get out of this life of worldly suffering, I really want spiritual growth. And to paraphrase her question, isn't that rajasic? I want. And then to make matters worse, in various texts, the one who wants moksha most sincerely is often compared to someone whose hair is on fire running towards a pond of water. That's a little rajasic. That frantically running towards that water. So if you say, isn't that raja, shouldn't I just be and this is the other question. I don't know, I'll just anticipate the other question. The other question is, shouldn't we be sattvika, just accepting? Sabtik, hey, everything is fine. No problem. What is your Tamil? Kashtam illai. By the way, this is about all I know of little Hindi and almost no Tamil. That's it. Don't expect any more from me. Addressing our Tamilian here. And if you want to claim, that's very sattvika, very accepting, very pathetic, very lazy. And that's a question. I'm not going to go searching for it because it'll take time to find it. But the other question, and maybe I'll find his name later, he says, since I've been on this spiritual pursuit, the questioner says, I find myself getting, I no longer see worldly accomplishments as being capable of bringing perfect contentment and peace into my life. Excellent. He says, but as a consequence, I've become lazy. That's something else. To watch this. To recognize that worldly pursuits will not make you happy, and then to become lazy as a result has nothing to do with being spiritual. That's disillusionment. Nothing spiritual in that at all. The world is useless, so I'm just going to sit here. That is disillusionment. There's nothing spiritual. Spiritual life is focused on discovering your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, or some people will say discovering God, or whatever language you want to use. It's a positive pursuit, not a negative one. Running and just merely saying the world is useless is not spiritual. That is, as I said, disillusionment. What do they call it? Sour grapes. You know, every time I try to find happiness, nothing comes, and I just end up working really hard and getting nothing for my efforts. That's sour grapes. That's not spiritual at all. On the other hand, when you recognize that the true source of peace and contentment lies within, then you're motivated. And watch how that motivation carries over. In order to pursue the true source of contentment and peace within, your life should be in reasonable order. Because if your life is not in reasonable order, too much of your attention will go into dealing with the chaos of your life. And the reason I'm making this point is that someone who is on a spiritual quest is someone who is simultaneously engaged in dealing with worldly responsibilities so that life doesn't become a problem and a distraction. You just want to take care of everything so you don't have to worry about it, and so you can spend more attention within. So a combination of, the technical word is vairagya. Vairagya means dispassion. Vairagya is an attitude wherein you see the absence of value in worldly pursuits. But vairagya plus laziness is not spiritual. Vairagya plus a commitment to engage in spiritual practice, vairagya plus a commitment to take care of your worldly responsibilities so that they don't become obstacles or distractions, that's spiritual life. But dispassion, vairagya plus laziness, really disillusionment, depression, I'm not sure what to call it, but that's it. So here's a good case where, an interesting observation, rajas, in the context, and this, I'm coming back now to Aparna's question, rajas in the context of spiritual growth is not a defect. It's commitment, engagement. Yeah, enough said. Okay, we'll take one more question here. That was Aparna. This is Saurabh. Saurabh lives in Bangalore. And Saurabh says, I'm at a stage where I understand worldly desires are not going to help me gain moksha. Oh, this is a question. So this is Saurabh. In fact, everything I just said, it was at the very next question. So Saurabh's question is already dealt with in those comments. Then one more here. This is interesting. This is from Adam, who lives in Israel. Interesting. Nice that Adam can join us. And the question, he's talking about the craving for moksha. And I would need to paraphrase a little bit, is the craving for moksha, liberation, freedom, spiritual growth culminating in enlightenment? Is that craving, interesting language he uses, is that just a vain individual who thinks he is better than other people because he knows that worldly things are not going to lead to perfect contentment, but a spiritual journey can, which makes him feel proud of himself? I'm not sure how, and this again, should there be a dharmic intent behind this craving? And he again says, why am I rajasic towards Advaita Vedanta? Good. Be better to be rajasic towards Advaita Vedanta than towards money and fame and food, whatever it is, because that energy you put into spiritual growth will keep you on a path that leads you out of suffering. So you're going in the right direction. This is a very loose connection. The mind goes all kinds of connections. In one commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, there's an interesting discussion about whether rajas is helpful or not for meditation. And the commentator says, you need rajas. Otherwise, you'll fall asleep. He says that the path to sattva is from tamas through rajas. Rajas is not your enemy. This is in the Yoga Sutra, actually, commentary. So the path from tamas necessarily passes through rajas en route to sattva. So being rajasic about Vedanta is good. On the other hand, feeling like you are on a spiritual path and you're somehow better, which is not, I don't think that's what Adam feels. But if somebody does feel like that, I'm a spiritual person, therefore I'm better than others, that's hypocrisy. You know, to say that you're spiritual and you're in one sentence, I'm spiritual and I'm better than others. Hypocritical. Okay, shall we take some questions here? Right here.
Namaste, Swamiji. Can you please re-explain again what is the entity of free will in comparison to Ishvara and desire, raga, dvesha? So, for example, if an action is attempted, like you just said, one may consider that, oh, this is the way it is to happen. And on the other end, there may be somebody who may feel totally in possession of that. I am doing this, and this is the way I am doing it. So where does free will reside, in this context? And this may apply to day-to-day activities or specific endeavors.
The example you gave is actually problematic. Someone who says, I have to accept this situation as it is, uses their free will to accept. Right? You can use your free will to pursue something. You can use your free will not to pursue something. Both are examples of free will. In fact, the classic, the definition of free will in Sanskrit is kartum, akartum, anyata kartum. This is just how they like giving these definitions. You can do something, or you can not do something, or you can do something in a different way. All of that is free will. So when you say someone might use free will to address a problem, someone might not address the problem and just accept it, but that's also free will. You choose to do, you choose not to do, or you choose to do in another way. Now, with that refinement, could I ask you to rephrase your question?
Thank you. Where is Ishvara in this? So,
Where is Ishvara in that process? Ishvara is the source of everything that exists, including free will. Ishvara has endowed human beings with free will, and apparently has not endowed animals, we are animals, but other animals do not seem to have free will. That's certainly not to the extent that a human being has. So we are endowed with free will by Ishvara. And go ahead. I'm not sure where you're going with that. Follow up, please.
And destiny or karma, the assimilated karmas. For example, when one is born, one has sanchita karma already. So for example, if there is somebody who's born poor, in that phase of poverty, how does this individual or somebody is born without any spiritual commitment, any circumstances of spiritual commitment, how does this person, so that was the karma or the result of that's birth. How does one assimilate free will, or how does free will come into picture if destiny has already placed you in certain position?
Notice you've actually answered your own question, I think. And that is, you may be born into a certain situation, but you still have free will. You could say that with your free will, you can choose to respond to your situation. So you gave the example. Suppose someone's born poor due to karma. And we can accept that. We don't know, but we can say, we can imagine, we can suppose that someone who is born into an impoverished family because of karma, perhaps it happens. But having been born into that impoverished family, that person still has free will. Which means the person can choose to do something about the poverty. The person could choose not to do anything about the poverty, or the person can choose to do something else. I don't know what something else would be in this case, but that's the point. So notice these two, the karmas that you're born with loosely called destiny, and the free will that you have, these are not in conflict. I'm not sure this is your issue, but it is for many people. They want to reconcile, if I have a certain destiny, then what is a role of free will? And some people take this to such an extent as to go for a doctrine of predestination. Everything is predetermined by the karmas you're born with, which is obviously incorrect. Because the example I just gave is enough. You're born impoverished, but you still have free will. You can do something. So you can say that karma is a fact. We are born with certain karmas. But the karmas we're born with do not predestine or predetermine everything that's going to happen in our lives. Yet, that's a common misconception among many Hindus, especially older generations of Hindus. And I'll just give you my brief take on that, as it were. This confusion about life being predestined or predetermined was never mainstream Hinduism. Never. In Mahabharata, it's hinted at, but every time it's hinted at, it gets dismissed. So in Mahabharata, somebody will say, oh, life is predetermined. Then somebody says, no, it's not. And they'll explain why it's not and how it's not. So then if that's so, why is it that so many Hindus have this misinterpretation about the doctrine of karma, that it gets interpreted as a doctrine of predestination or predetermination? By the way, you should know that certain groups of Christians, not all, but certain groups of Christians also believe in predestination. I think a minority, but it's there. And not surprisingly, I think the majority of Muslims accept the fact that we are predestined by Allah, whatever is going to happen in our lives. Well, it turns out that, and this is my conjecture, I might be wrong, you can accept it, you need not accept it, because it's my conjecture, my theory. My theory is that because Islam has been in India for over 600 years, side by side with Hindu culture, I think it's rubbed off on Hindu culture, in some cases to a great extent, and the extent is you see in language. When somebody says in Hindi, when you say my destiny, what word do you use? Kismat, which is not a Sanskrit word. It's a word from Islamic culture, or nasib. These are, I'm not sure if they're of Persian origin or Arabic origin, but they are from Islamic culture. So the closest we have in Sanskrit is bhagya. Bhagya is a Sanskrit word which is often interpreted as destiny. But if you go to the root meaning of bhagya, turns out it primarily means not destiny, it primarily means blessings or good fortune. And from a Hindu standpoint, those blessings or good fortune would be the result of good karma. So, really speaking, Hinduism in general, based on the doctrine of karma, completely rejects this notion of anything being predetermined or predestined. We are all born with good and bad karmas. Those good and bad karmas do not predetermine any events in our lives. We could say that the good karmas we're born with puts our life on a more pleasant path. The bad karmas, so-called bad karmas we're born with, puts our lives on a more difficult path. But nothing is predetermined. And the final point here is, regardless of whatever good or bad karmas are manifesting themselves at your life at a particular point in time, you still have free will how you respond. You can do something, you can not do something, you can do something else. Okay? Okay. Let's take just a couple more questions and then I think time to wrap it up for today. This is a question from Archana. Archana doesn't say where she lives. My question is the word Hindu mentioned in the Yajurveda? There's a lot of confusion about the word Hindu. Some people argue that it's not present in our scriptures and it's a mispronunciation of the word Indu or Sindhu, whereas there's one Acharya who claims that it's present in the Yajurveda, and she gives a link to that. I went and listened to him. He speaks in Hindi, and I can understand just enough. And I did not look up his he didn't give where in Yajurveda is. I didn't take the time to go looking where the reference is. I would say whether or not the word, and people love to argue about this stuff. I would say that whether or not the word Hindu comes in the Veda or not is irrelevant. Turns out we have plenty of historical evidence to know that the word Hindu was originally a geographic term to talk about the people who lived on the other side of the Indus River, the Sindhu, and it ended up getting pronounced Hindu. So it was originally a geographic term, obviously given by these Arab invaders, Mughal invaders, whoever they were. So it was originally a non-Indian word, a non-native word, outside word, like Kismet and Nasib. Fine. Now here we are, 600 years later, 600 to 400 years later. So Islam came into India 600 AD. So here we are 400 years later. And the word Hindu has been used for a long time. I've noticed that some people are allergic to the word Hindu, and for the reasons that Archana makes here. We shouldn't, if you're teaching Advaita Vedanta, I shouldn't use words like Kismet and Nasib. to explain the doctrine of karma. These are foreign words, they're not helpful, they don't belong. So the argument goes, well then why should we use the word Hindu? And again, this is my personal opinion, so which means you don't have to agree with me, but this is how I feel about it. The word Hindu has been around for a long time. It's just conventional to use it. Further, the argument about the word Hindu not being in, whether it's in the Vedas, let's presume it's not in, by the way, I have a feeling it's not in the Yajur Veda, or if it is, it's maybe a distorted form. In Vedic times, they didn't use the word Hindu. I don't think there's any dispute about that. The word Hindu started 600 years ago. So you don't expect to find it in the Vedas, which are thousands of years ago. But then the people who are allergic to the word Hindu will say we should use the word Sanatana Dharma. Well, it turns out the word Sanatana Dharma is also not used in the Vedas. It's not. The word Hindu is not used in the Vedas. The word Sanatana Dharma is not used in the Vedas. What word is used in the Vedas is simply Dharma. Dharma meant religion. Then we go along and add this word Sanatana. A better word would actually be Vaidika, Vaidika Dharma. But you won't find the word Vaidika Dharma in the Vedas. They simply use Dharma. You only need an adjective when you need to distinguish your thing about your religion from something else. In India, 3,000 years ago, there was only this one tradition. They didn't need to distinguish. Today, of course, we have so many distinctions. But in ancient times, all of these distinctions were yet to evolve. So there was one general religious tradition. They didn't call it, obviously they didn't call it Hinduism, but they didn't call it Sanatana Dharma either 3,000 years ago. They simply called it Dharma. So based on all of this, to me it seems, and again, this is my personal opinion, there's no harm in using the word Hindu, since it's become a commonly used word. I would add one thing. If you become allergic to the word Hindu, what kind of message does that send to others? I think to me it's a very negative message to other Hindus and to non-Hindus especially. Can you imagine a Christian who says, I don't know, what would they say? A Christian who says, our practice is not really Christianity, since we're not following, I don't know if this really applies. There are plenty of arguments that the teachings of Christ don't necessarily govern what is practiced in Christian churches, but rather that the traditions of the church are what's practiced. So they say instead of Christianity, they could call it churchianity. That's their term. Don't blame me. So suppose someone says we should stop using Christianity because what we're following is actually what's based on the tradition of our particular church. We should abandon the word Christianity. It's false. What we're actually practicing is churchianity. So if a Christian were to say that, what kind of message does it send? Even though it might be technically correct, it sends the wrong message. So I think, in my opinion, to accept the word Hindu, knowing that it's a foreign word, we knowingly can use that word without making a big deal of it. Okay. Actually, I think this would be a good time to conclude our satsang. So we'll finish with our prayers. Om. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschad dukkha bhag bhavet asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. See you next time.